Father, how can we trust any so-called saints who are canonized since Vatican II, for example, Pope John the 23rd and Pope Paul the 6th? Has not the process of canonization been so bastardized?
Well, yes. I think it was, how can we trust?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. I don't think we can really trust it. Our problem right now, I mean, certainly one of the very serious problems of the crisis in the church today is that the teaching office, actually, exactly what Chris just finished quoting. That was Newman, right, Chris?
Yeah, Cardinal Newman.
Yeah, he said something about there was a temporary something in the Ecclesia Docens.
Yeah,
okay, suspension. Yeah, I mean, providential. Thank you, God. What Chris Ferrara just quoted about Newman saying that there was a temporary suspension of the Ecclesia Docens, I can't quite think of a better way to also describe what is taking place today, where the teaching office of the church is really called into question because, I mean, particularly when you see what's happening in the last couple of years, the kind of documents that are coming out from Rome, the present prefect for the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith, Fernandez. I mean, terrible. And so you just can't trust these men. And so it really does throw everything into a chaos because the question specifically about, the whole question of the saints, it's true that the process of canonization, you can't make assumptions about those who are being canonized based on the traditional process of canonization that was taking place prior to the Second Vatican Council. So, I mean, I can tell you that personally, I've never referred to John Paul II as St. Paul John II, and I guess they've also now have they canonized supposedly Paul VI? Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. I don't know how many, that is crazy. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the case of Paul VI, but I mean, Paul VI, there was a time when they were attempting to canonize him, I think, probably in the maybe 80s and 90s. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong on something, correct me, but you had, I think, Father Luigi Villa, thank you, Father Luigi Villa, who put together, a lot of evidence against the possible canonization of Paul VI, so much so that the whole cause was shut down. You would think definitively saying, we're not proceeding ahead with this. And again, all of that, I guess, set off to the side, and then all of a sudden now, recently under the, again, I say also so-called pontificate of Francis, that, now all of a sudden he's a saint. I mean, it really is ridiculous when you examine everything that's been taking place. So, I mean, to finish up the answer quickly, hopefully somebody will add to this. Yeah, I don't think you can trust it, and I think that's very sad. But, yeah.
Recommend a book that's available on Amazon, Are Canonizations Infallible? I happen to be a contributor, but there are other really prestigious actual theologians, unlike me, who contributed to this, and one of them is Monsignor Bernardo Gherardini, a major figure in Catholic theology and in the traditional movement, Father Hunnick, Peter Kwasniewski, and we all debated this issue in the covers of a book. So my position, for whatever it's worth as a layman, is more of a legalistic position. We have a process that has developed. Once papal canonizations became a papal act, as opposed to local canonizations by bishops, which were often by popular acclaim and could certainly be doubted in a number of cases. Once the Pope took over the process, a verification procedure developed gradually over time. There had to be verified miracles, there were medical commissions to verify the miracle, a deep investigation into the life of the proposed saint to see if he really lived a life of heroic virtue. And so the question I pose, and I don't pretend to have the answer, is if the process is compromised, and it's obvious that this is just, as John Venari, the late great John Venari put it, a halo award. And it's just, and even, I think even Cardinal Ratzinger at one point in time remarked this process that too much it's driven by popularity, it becomes a popularity contest. If that's what's happening, and the process is therefore corrupted so that it's not reliable, can we rely on the canonization itself? No, I don't answer the question. I don't know the answer. But the question I pose is, if we need the process to be sure that we're canonizing someone who really is a saint, then if the process is corrupted, how can we say, well, whatever the Pope says goes? I don't know the answer, but it can't be the situation that the Pope can just pick somebody randomly out of the crowd, pronounce a canonization formula, and we can't doubt it because he pronounced a formula. The Pope himself needed the process. So doubts now have arisen. And that's where I am. I'm in a state of doubt. And nothing in church teaching says that canonizations, at least there's nothing infallible, churches have been pronounced as a dogma, that whoever denies that a canonization is valid, let him be anathema. So there's room for debate. Not much, maybe, but there's still a debatable issue here. That's why there's a whole book on it.
I'll take a very sort of simple approach to this question, and I'll go back to my always distinguish. I think that's so important. What do we understand when we're talking about a canonization? I think you have to start right there. You just mentioned, is it just a halo award? Sometimes I think Catholics just think canonization means you're in heaven. That's really not in the tradition of the church what the canonization was about. Ultimately, what the canonization was about is that you lived a life of heroic virtue and you had correct teaching. Actually, lex orandi, lex credendi. And that you lived the duties of your state in a heroic way. You exemplified heroic virtue, and therefore you were a model to follow. You set an example, and others should follow you. And you taught correctly, and others could confide in your teaching. That's really why we canonized individuals. And that's what's been lost. It's not just to say you're up in heaven. There are many people who are up in heaven that are not canonized. Perhaps people in our own families, but they're not canonized. And so this is the problem when you look, for example, to let's just say, take the example of John Paul II. I will never kiss the Quran. I will never worship Buddha on a Catholic altar. I will never attend a liturgy where a woman is bare-breasted and reading from the gospel. But unfortunately, John Paul II did those things. Those are not exemplary things that any of us should seek to imitate, let alone a priest, bishop, or cardinal. But see, when you canonize someone, you're saying it was heroic, it was exemplar. And then we can go into various other teachings that have been issued. So this really is a problem. They have not just, as Chris pointed out, altered the process. In the height of modernism, they completely eviscerated what a canonization means and replaced it with something else. And that's what they want to say is infallible. I find it utterly preposterous. So that's my answer, and I think it's a very simple one. Follow the example of the saints, follow the teaching of the saints. If they have bad example, if they have bad teaching, then we're not going to canonize them and raise them up to the honor of our altars.
And one other comment on that, that obviously...
Can't argue with that.
One other comment on the canonizations. Obviously, this is not something that we can know with certainty because we can't know with certainty, let's say, hidden motives of those that are involved. But I think it's very significant that it's in recent years that the push was made to, again, in quotations, canonize Pope Paul VI, Pope John the 23rd, Pope Paul VI, and Pope John Paul II, all post-conciliar popes who were the popes who, let's say, well, John 23rd, maybe not so much a post-conciliar pope, but have they already canonized John Paul I also? They're moving, yeah, that I heard. See, look at the pattern. They're moving to have all of the post-Vatican II popes canonized, again, and I'm including John 20, but John the 23rd, Paul VI, John Paul I, John Paul II. Yeah, interestingly, not Benedict, who began to question how the aftermath of Vatican II. But anyway, you can't help but see in there an agenda. Again, we can't prove that, but an agenda to try and also, by doing this, in a sense, adding the weight of authority and credibility to Vatican II, kind of forcing all of us as Catholics to say, well, everybody has to accept Vatican II because look, all these, in quotations, saintly, popes are the ones that implemented it. But my interpretation of it is, well, that is why there's that much more doubt in my mind about all of these supposed canonizations that have come afterwards. So I definitely think that that's something also to consider.
Father has suggested something that's really significant. There's a rush to canonize everybody since the council, but not a single move in the direction of canonizing Benedict XVI.
Yeah, and even
Isn't that interesting?
even Pius XII, Chris.
Yeah, Pius XII. That's a disgrace, by the way, that Pius XII hasn't already been canonized. That man was a living saint, quite obviously.
And this isn't de fide, but I just kind of, again, want you to know history and tradition. Great Pope, Pope Innocent III, he's the one who actually works with St. Francis and St. Dominic to start these orders. He's one of the greatest popes of the Middle Ages. And according to, and I forget which holy nun it was, she's a saint, I believe she was a Belgian nun. In her testimony, she said that after he passed away and no one knew that he was dead yet, at least not in Belgium, it was back in the 1200s, he appeared to her. And he was in the fires of purgatory. And he said, I haven't made it to heaven because I had 3 faults. That as a pope, I had 3 particular faults that have got me, Innocent III. And he's saying, and so I'm not in heaven. Like, you're thinking that, see, the thing is also for a pope to be canonized, it means so much more, but that's how canonization was understood. And so I'm pretty sure Innocent III never got canonized for these 3 faults. Just something to think about. How we understood this and how much has been changed. Again, my emphasis, the heresy of modernism, eviscerating our understanding of canonization, replacing it with something else.